In yesterday's daily lectionary reading from the Gospel of Mark, we saw Jesus multiply loaves and fishes for a second time, this time for a crowd of 4,000. And we saw that yet again the disciples were skeptical of Jesus' ability to provide food in the desert for such a large crowd. In today's reading, there are 3 added wrinkles to this story. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. The first wrinkle in the story is another brief confrontation with the Pharisees, who are looking for a sign from Jesus. But Jesus sees through their ruse. They're not really looking for a sign. He knows they're just looking for an excuse to condemn him. The second wrinkle is a conversation between Jesus and the disciples as they cross the Sea of Galilee yet again. Let's listen in on this conversation. Now the disciples had forgotten to bring any bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod." They said to one another, "It is because we have no bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said to them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect?" They said to him, 12. "And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you collect?" And they said to him, 7. Then he said to them, "Do you not yet understand?" So once again, we're back to bread. This time, it's about the bread which they have in the boat with them, or rather, the lack of bread. And although the Sea of Galilee isn't that big, it's big enough that you would probably want a snack on the journey across. The lack of bread is apparently a problem for the disciples, or at least they see it as a problem. The real problem, though, is their lack of understanding. Jesus addresses their lack of understanding first with a warning about the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Though Jesus doesn't say here what he means by the leaven of the Pharisees, it seems pretty clear that he means their willful refusal to understand who he is and what he's doing. Their willfulness sets them at odds with Jesus and his ministry of proclaiming the coming kingdom of God. Jesus' warning to the disciples seems to me that their lack of understanding is borderline willfulness to misunderstand him. Then, in an effort to cajole them into understanding, he reminds them of his 2 recent miracles of providing sufficient bread for large crowds, one of 5,000 and one of 4,000. He even asks them to tell them how many baskets full of bread were left over after each miracle. And then he concludes with that accusing question, "Do you still not understand?" Now we come to the third twist. When they arrive at their destination, they encounter a blind man. Listen to this part of the story. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. The contrast between the blind man who regains his sight on the one hand and the Pharisees and disciples on the other could not be more clear. Through Jesus' healing touch, the blind man regains his sight and now can see clearly. The Pharisees and disciples, on the other hand, even though they have seen, still do not really see. With the Pharisees, it is an active, willful, even hostile refusal to see. The disciples' lack of understanding doesn't include the hostility of the Pharisees, but it still borders on the willful. They have seen time and again what Jesus does, and yet they simply fail to connect the dots. They know he's someone special. Otherwise, why would they follow him? But they apparently still cannot see him clearly for who he is. That will come in time, but for now, it is an apparent source of exasperation for Jesus. You'd think it was time for Jesus to set them straight. And in fact, that is exactly what he will do in tomorrow's story from Mark. Jesus takes the disciples north to a Gentile town and asks them the all-important question. What question is it? Let's find out tomorrow. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.